This video is part 2 in a video series on the history of the Inquisition. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, I recommend you do that before you catch up. For everyone else, let's talk about the Spanish Inquisition. The origins of the Spanish Inquisition lies in the social tensions that emerged out of the High and Late Middle Ages, in what in time would become the country of Spain. These changes was mainly due to political and economical events taking place on the Iberian Peninsula, mainly during the 14th century. Civil war and economic distress stirred religious fanaticism, and several cities saw urban mobs directing their anger against the privileged class and against the Jews. Many unprotected Jews were forced to become Christians, and these newly Christian converts would come to be known as Conversos. Since many Conversos had been forced to convert to Christianity, many were not genuine Christians, and though they were allowed to convert back to Judaism, many did not feel safe in doing so due to the new circumstances that had arisen during the 14th century, and felt more safe in remaining as Christians. These newly Christian converts were in general regarded with suspicion by the rest of the Christian society, and many Conversos were accused for being crypto-Jews. The tension between Jews and Christians continued during the 15th century. From the beginning of their reign in 1474, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were determined to maintain the peace between the Jews and the Christians, and one of the ways they tried to do that was by physically separating the two groups from each other. The two groups became more segregated from each other, and in year 1480 the crown founded the Inquisition that would come to be known as the Spanish Inquisition, with the main object to root out Conversos in the Christian population who were still practicing their Jewish faith in secret. During the reign of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, Jews were several times expelled from their home provinces and had to move to another province in Spain of their choice. This expulsion came to its edge with the Great Expulsion of 1492, when the Spanish crown gave many Jews living in southern Spain an ultimatum. They were forced to either convert to Christianity or leave the country. Many Jews converted, and those who did not convert fled to Spain or Portugal. At the time of the Great Expulsion, the Spanish Inquisition became firmly established, with the object to root out Conversos among the Christian population, who were still practicing their Jewish faith in secret. The history of the Spanish Inquisition can generally be divided into 4 periods. The first period was between 1480 to 1525. The Inquisition during this period was primarily focused with rooting out crypto-Jews among the Conversos, and the way it operated was characterized by ruthlessness and arbitrariness. The second period was between 1525 to 1630. During this period, the Spanish Inquisition became more stable in institutional terms. It was during this time that many of the Spanish regional Inquisition tribunals and procedural methods became well established. During this time, the Inquisition changed its focus from the Conversos and instead focused on countering Protestantism, minor heresies, and social deviances in the Christian population, such as bigamy, blasphemy, and loose moral behavior. The third period was between 1630 to 1725, and this was the beginning of the slow decline of the Spanish Inquisition that would last until the 19th century. The Inquisition continued to play a role in the pursuit of minor heresies during this period, but played a less prominent and vigorous role than earlier. The final period of the Spanish Inquisition was between 1725 to 1834. At the start of the 18th century, the Spanish Inquisition was merely a shadow of its former self, and its privileged position as a sacred order of society was by now considerably diminished, along with its sphere of activity. During its final days, the Spanish Inquisition was mainly concerned with minor moral matters, such as drunkenness and swearing in church. In 1834, the Inquisition was formally abolished by royal decree. The Spanish Inquisition was, like its medieval predecessors, formally under the control of the papacy. However, this was only a formality, and in practice, the Spanish Inquisition was controlled by the Spanish crown. It worked as an instrument of royal policy and remained politically under the subject of the crown for all of its existence, with the kings of Spain being the ones who were appointing the inquisitorial staff. Unlike its medieval predecessor, the Spanish Inquisition was geographically organized into different regional tribunals. In the beginning, the tribunals were placed where a particular Judaizing community was thought to exist. When the tribunal had finished its work, it could be moved to another location. As time went on, more tribunals were established all over Spain, the last being the Tribunal of Madrid, which was established in year 1640. Each tribunal was assigned a district that it was responsible for. Above the regional tribunals were the Inquisitorial Council, known as the Suprema. The council consisted of an unspecified number of members and was led by the Inquisitor General, who was the official head of the Spanish Inquisition. The purpose of the Suprema was to supervise how the regional tribunals operated, as well as representing the Inquisition at court. The regional tribunal staff consisted of at least 2 inquisitors, usually one who was a jurist and another who was a theologian. Outside that, the tribunal also had an assessor, a constable, and a prosecutor. Due to the disparity of the tribunal personnel, the Spanish Inquisition often relied on familiars and commissarios who helped them in their work. The familiars were essentially lay servants who performed duties in the service of the tribunals. In return, they were allowed to bear arms to protect the inquisitors, as well as a few other privileges. Commissarios were normally parish priests who acted for the Inquisition on special occasions and also supplied it with information. The way the regional tribunals worked was very systematically. The inquisitors would start by traveling to a town or village. Upon arriving, the inquisitors would preach a sermon on heresy and declare an edict of grace. The edict lasted from 2 weeks up to several months, and during this period, people was encouraged to come forward with confessions and accusations. If a heretic confessed to the inquisitors during this period, they would be reconciled with the church without suffering any serious penalties. Early on, the Edict of Grace was changed with the Edict of Faith, which was similar to the Edict of Grace, except that it threatened all who failed to denounce heretics, themselves or others, with excommunication. Due to fear of denunciation, it was common that many people came forward with confessions during the edict. Once the edict had passed and the inquisitors had assembled evidence against an individual, and the evidence seems to indicate a case of heresy, the inquisitors issued a command of arrest, taking the accused suspect into custody. Once the suspect had been arrested, the suspect's family was formally notified that it might use its power of attorney to obtain a defense for the accused. The accused heretic was jailed until the hearing was complete. If sufficient evidence was accumulated against an accused person who did not confess, the inquisitors had torture at its disposal. However, as with the medieval inquisitors, the inquisitors of the Spanish Inquisition rarely used torture during their interrogations, and when it was used, it was very restricted. Confessions gained under torture were never accepted as valid, because they obviously had been obtained by pressure, so a suspect that confessed while being subject to torture therefore had to repeat the confessions later while not being subject to torture for the confession to be valid. When the evidence was assessed, and if the guilt of a suspect had been established, the inquisitors issued the sentence of the convicted heretic in a public ceremony called the auto de fe. The purpose with the auto de fe was to reinforce the faith of those who observed it, and to celebrate the penitence of those who participated in it. The sentence of a convicted heretic could range from dismissal of charges, confiscation of goods, imprisonment, and exile, among other things. The most common sentence for a convicted heretic was reconciliation with the church, that often was followed with conditions attached to the freedom of the convicted person. This could include the need to wear a distinct garnet called the San Benito for a specific period of time, the need to make a pilgrimage, or to participate in liturgical ceremonies. In the case of convicted heretics that relapsed or refused to repent, the most common response by the Spanish inquisitors was to hand over the heretics to the secular authorities, which pretty much always ended up with the heretics' executions. The fall of the Spanish Inquisition was a slow process. In the early 18th century, the Inquisition was a mere shadow of its former self. It was dramatically understaffed, underfinanced, and uncertain of what its purpose were, since the groups it originally had been created to persecute was long gone. Nearly all of the trials it held by this time concerned moral offenses rather than heretical, and its sphere of activity was actively shrinking. The invasion of Spain by Napoleon in 1808 and the establishment of Joseph Bonaparte as the King of Spain hastened its demise. Between year 1810 and 1813, the Inquisition saw its privileges suppressed and its legal powers abolished. The Spanish Inquisition was revived after the Napoleonic Wars in 1814, but it was clear that its days were numbered. In 1830, the papacy revoked the Inquisition's powers in matter of heresy, and in 1834 it was formally abolished by royal decree. The Spanish Inquisition has for centuries been the subject of several myths and legends. Due to time pressure I had in making this video, I will not go over them here, but if you're interested, there is a very good BBC documentary from 1994 called The Myth of the Spanish Inquisition. Link to the documentary can be found in the description. If you are interested in doing your own research, which is something I highly recommend, the literature used in this video can be found in the description. The main source being the 3rd edition of Professor Henry Kamen's The Spanish Inquisition and Historical Revision, which is by far one of the best introductions to the history of the Spanish Inquisition available. And don't forget that if you like this video and want to see more videos like it, hit the like, share and subscribe buttons.